Hello, thanks for tuning in for another video. On this video I'm going to talk a little bit about how psychic predictions can manifest over time. A psychic reading, of course, isn't only purely about predictive information. It can cover a wide area. Mediumship can occur with evidence of departed loved ones. Spirit guides can come through. Spirit can talk about what's going on in a person's life now, and even sometimes past life information can come through. However, from time to time, in fact very often, a predictive element can begin to take place in a reading or in readings that, coupled with information about what's going on in a person's life now and perhaps events that have led up to the current situation, very often Spirit will want to provide some kind of encouragement for the person having the reading, particularly if they're in a difficult situation. They'll identify what's going on at the moment so the person can accurately validate that the message is coming from Spirit, and then very often they will give an indication as to the likely outcome. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes I've had clear messages from Spirit that, whilst they've very accurately detailed the fine detail of what's going on in a person's life now, to show the person that they are actively aware and are involved, sometimes, particularly if there is a decision to make, they might say to me to tell the client, no, they're not going to tell them in advance what's going to happen, because there is a learning process that happens by the client making that decision through the exercising of their own wisdom and judgment. So sometimes they won't tell me. Sometimes, and you know, Spirit obviously knows best, that learning curve doesn't need to always take place in that particular situation, and they might say, yes, this is what's going to happen, and be quite accurate with that regard. And predictive information can happen within hours, sometimes within a day or so, sometimes within weeks and months, and sometimes it can take place over years. And I'm going to read to you now, if I may, or in a few moments, a testimonial from a client. I've been giving her readings now for about 6 years, and she was in a very difficult situation a number of years ago and had a reading with me, and Spirit indicated to me to tell her that she would be offered a role in Australia. 2 organisations would offer her roles at about the same time, one of which would necessitate moving to Australia, where she would have a lovely flat and or apartment, depends what terminology you use, and this you know, good job, nice apartment, and a new start in Australia. And over a number of years, this message was given to me to give to her. And when she first received it, naturally she was quite optimistic, but as time passed, she began to doubt the message. And as I've talked about in another video that I recorded earlier today, that's on my YouTube channel, about cross-correspondence in psychic readings, sometimes after she had a reading with me and was quite doubtful that this was ever going to come to pass, I would say to her, go and have a reading. Why don't you go and have a reading with another psychic? So she did, and the other psychic, she obviously found some other accurate psychics. They too gave her similar information. But when you're in a difficult situation, I know, I've been there myself, I've had messages myself from Spirit and from other psychics and mediums, but when you're really in testing circumstances, it can, you know, really pull at your faith sometimes. So, you know, she would phone for a reading, information would come through that was helpful for her in those current events, but it seemed that the big message of the Australia move wasn't happening. Until eventually it did. It came about exactly as Spirit had predicted, and it took 5 years to happen. So I'm just going to read it. Hopefully you'll be able to see. Tell you what I'll do, let me just pick this up. There you go. You can see I'm reading this from my website, and here we go. Well, I can't get the computer in, but there you go, you can see me reading. So, I'm going to need to put my glasses on. Hold up a second. There we go. This is what she says. I've been having readings with Karen for almost 5 years now. Right from the start, Karen has picked up in detail that I would have the choice of 2 jobs overseas, one in particular being Australia. As time went on and this wasn't materialising despite my best efforts, I always held on to what Karen said, only because the little stuff that he picked up on was coming to pass. And then she goes on, as time went on, however, I didn't believe what Karen was saying, even though this message still presented itself in subsequent readings. So at first, she did believe, she did hold on to what was coming through in the readings, because other things that were being said that she could validate at the time were coming true. But there came a point as time went by that she couldn't. So she carries on. The last reading I had at the beginning of this year, which then was 2015, also brought up the same thing and a connection with New York. I was on my way to a trip to Singapore for work meetings, and Karen had said that I would come back with a gift and a reward. So this was a continuance of the message that came through before. Well, he was absolutely right. Whilst in Singapore and beyond my expectations, one firm thoroughly interviewed me for one role, although based in Singapore. So I said 2 banks would offer 2 jobs at about the same time. And this was the Singapore one. It wasn't until I got back to the UK and several weeks had passed that out of the blue I was considered for a role in Australia, which I have now accepted. The New York connection was also spot on because someone I worked for in New York gave me a glowing reference. Looking back on it, despite Karen saying exactly what he was saying, it was very difficult to believe and carry on. But I persevered, and in the end, after 5 years, the job and the change of country has manifested exactly how Karen had picked it. And of course, the information came from Spirit. I couldn't have got that on my own. Excuse me now, as we move around a little bit. So, this lady received the information in difficult circumstances, and Spirit consistently reiterated that information. Now, from my perspective, as some of those years were passing, and I could tell she was in a stressful situation, and she would ring me for a reading, and I would recommend that she would maybe have readings with other psychics. I don't claim to be 100% accurate. Nobody is. Arizona State University, Professor Gary Schwartz shows that the best of us are about 80% accurate. Sometimes we get things wrong, sometimes we misinterpret things, and who knows what else can happen in this process. It is not an exact science. So I would recommend to her that she would go and have readings with other psychics, and they would validate the same kind of message. But then when she would come back to me, and sometimes she was pretty stressed, the pressure upon me as I was receiving this information to give it to her again, and it looked like it wasn't coming to pass, was intense. So for both of us, it was a really big learning curve, because the one ongoing theme from Spirit was the same message. Sometimes I worried. I go, look, I might be wrong. Talk to somebody else, please. And she did. And she doubted. So both of us wobbled at points, but Spirit didn't. Spirit was consistent because they knew. And 5 years later, having predicted that outcome, it came to pass in exactly the way that they predicted before. So, and I've encountered this in my own life. I've had readings over the years, beginning around about 16 years ago, 16 or maybe more than that now. 16, 18 years ago, something like that. I can't quite remember exactly. No, 18, I think. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Around about 16, 18 years ago, when I first started having some readings with other psychics, some of those, in fact, most of them predicted things. I've talked about cross-correspondence in a previous video, how one psychic can pick something up and the other psychic unconnected with them does, and it's obviously Spirit conveying the same message through different sources. And I've had that a number of times with a number of psychics. Fortunately, I know a number of psychics working in this field. Some just to have readings with, and others on a friendly basis. And sometimes when you're around them, they'll get a message from Spirit and just share it with you. And I've had instances where several of them have picked up on the same events that have happened and are due to happen in my life yet. And in some occasions I've had to wait a long time for things to come to pass, but they have come to pass. And a little bit like the person who very kindly gave me that testimonial, sometimes they've come to pass at the point that I've given up hope that they would be accurate. This must be, like, again, I don't pretend to have all the answers. It seems that there is a process by which we develop faith, and sometimes we manage to be faithful all the time until something manifests, and sometimes we lose our faith. And I would give an example. I remember it was predicted that I would be interviewed on the radio, and years elapsed, and I remember I was out walking my dog Libby with somebody, talking about this, and as a number of years had elapsed and the prediction was from somebody else who I don't recall that I received the information to, so it was a purely external prediction. I remember saying to this person, no, I've given up on that. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think it was the very next day, BBC Radio phoned me at about 8 o'clock in the morning and said, can you be available to do an interview at 11 o'clock later that day, live on the air? They'll do it by phone. So I said yes. I was interviewed for about 10 or 15 minutes live on the air. As a result of that interview, they asked me to come into the studio for a 45-minute interview. And then as a result of that 45-minute interview, about a month later, Hot Radio, which is a Bournemouth, Dorset-based radio station, called me into their studio to do another interview. And this was all about my work as a psychic medium. So 3 interviews within the space of about 6 to 8 weeks. But they happened. The door opened for them, I think the very day after I'd said, given up on it, it's not going to happen. So, even we that work with spirit, I can be faithful to a great degree, but my faith can be tested just as anybody else's can. And sometimes one of the ways I learn to develop faith is by having lost it, and then spirit proves to me, even though I lost faith, spirit didn't, and they open the door to the next step in the furtherance, in this case, of the path I'm walking, and in the work I do as a psychic medium to get understanding of this out there to the wider public. So keep the faith. That can be the title of this. I don't know if I can't remember now if I gave it a name when I started to talk to you, but I'm going to call it Keep the Faith, and very much like the article I was quoting from on my website. Keep the faith. Just because something doesn't happen instantaneously, if the reading that you've had is accurate overall, there might be 1 or 2 things that you couldn't make sense of, but if there's a large percentage of information that you can validate at the time of the reading as being accurate, then on balance of probabilities, if there's a predictive element to it, then realistically you can leave the reading thinking, well, if they got, as I said before perhaps on another video, they got my grandfather's name right, if they told me what's going on in my life now, if they told me about what my degree is. I can remember talking to a woman and saying, I think it was some kind of fashion thing. I said to this lady, she was in one job that Spirit had guided me to talk about, and I remember saying to her, what Spirit's saying, you've got an aptitude for, I think it was fashion or clothes design or something. And she said, oh my goodness, I've got a degree in that, but I never did anything with it. Now, I didn't know that consciously, but Spirit guided me to it, and to reflect it back to her as there was an area of her life, somewhere that field that she could be working in that would have been much more fulfilling for her. So we develop faith, and sometimes we develop it by holding on to that faith and something comes to pass. Sometimes we develop it by losing our faith, and Spirit comes through in spite of the fact that we lost our faith to prove to us, even when we lose faith, Spirit doesn't, and they will come through in the end. And then on balance of probabilities, if we're having a reading, and most if not all of everything that's come through that is verifiable at the time is good, then we can pretty much go, okay, well, all that was good, so there's a pretty good chance that the predictive elements are going to be good too. And then if we do cross correspondence, if we have a reading with another psychic and they come up with pretty much the same information, then that adds, if you like, an extra dimension. So I want to say to you, keep the faith, and if you get good information in a reading, there's a pretty good chance that if there's a predictive element involved, it will happen to one degree or another. But just might be the timing is not always clear. So don't let a lack of timing where you can maintain the faith, don't let a lack of timing undermine your faith. Hold on, keep your eye on the light at the end of the tunnel and trust that Spirit's timing isn't always the same as ours, but they will get us to where we need to get to in the best possible way at the best possible time. So thank you very much again for watching, and I'll talk to you again in the near future. Bye-bye for now.